This program is sponsored in part by the National Catholic Society of Foresters.
Hello again and welcome to Looking at Social Justice. You know, I have done now 25 of these conversations with special guests, but the one that I've been waiting to do is something on climate justice. It's like, for me, the most important social justice issue is not death penalty, which the Pope has already declared as inadmissible. It's not even hunger and homelessness, which are parts of major social problems. But when it comes push to shove, it is the environment. It's ecological justice. It's climate justice. It's being aware of the critical time that we are living in and deciding who has some answers. Well, 4 years ago, the Pope wrote that monumental piece, Laudato Si, on caring for our common home. And what Pope Francis did in that letter written to every inhabitant of planet Earth, he said, our common home, was to offer not a scientific answer, but to raise questions and to put that on everyone's plate to deal with, especially governments, especially communities, especially everyone. So today, it's my pleasure to have a special guest who has wanted to do a program here at KNXT, here at the Diocese of Fresno, and right now on Looking at Social Justice, Connie Young. She's a nurse, a registered nurse. It says here a mother of 2 adult daughters. I have 1 daughter, 2 sons, so beat you there. Longtime resident of Fresno. We've been here 30 years. How long have you been here?
Since the mid-'70s.
They're longer here than we are. Good for you. But for 10 years now, these last 10 years, has been passionately known to almost everybody in Fresno as the go-to person speaking for Citizens Climate Lobby as the group leader here, the leader in Fresno on Citizens Climate Lobby, Connie Young. Connie, it's a joy to finally get you on a show. So is there anything else you want to say about yourself as we begin the program right now, or about CCL? Anything you wanted to say before we talk about climate justice?
Well, I think what I would like to say is issue a disclaimer about myself and climate justice. The more I've come to learn about it, the more I realize I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination on climate justice. I've learned a lot about climate change and climate solutions. But climate justice is a little bit different in that it is a way of framing climate change and global warming in terms of to incorporate environmental justice, the ethics of climate change and social justice. It incorporates ideas like equality, human rights, collective rights, and the responsibilities of those who have caused the problem to be part of the solution and help those who have been affected by it. So I'm learning about this, and I've also learned that by virtue of the color of my skin and the circumstances under which I was raised and grew up and have worked all my life, I'm not really being that directly affected by climate change myself. And that the people that we need to listen to, and this is a principle of climate justice, we really need to pay attention to the folks who are being directly impacted by climate change, who are on the front lines. However, I will say that we are all being impacted on a psychological basis by climate change. It's in the news all the time. Polls are showing that people are concerned about this issue. And I mean, you just can't look at pictures from Mozambique, from the Midwest, and not be touched in some way.
I guess what I'll do is bring it back to Pope Francis. I have a summary of his encyclical, and it says, care for the earth, care for the poor. The heart of Pope Francis' encyclical. And in 28 pages, he does what you sent in your notes to me. You wanted to talk about ecological justice, climate justice in terms of the poor, that the people most affected are not us, white people living in the northern half of the world, living away from water, but those that are living on islands, those are living in situations that are already precarious, but now what's happening is definitely almost destroying the life they've had for centuries, and it's not for what they've ever done, it's for what has been done to them. So is there one more principle of climate justice you wanted to do before we talk a bit about the varying effects of climate change on populations?
Yeah.
Anything else about climate justice before this idea of the most affected people? Like, why are they the most affected people?
So you touched on some of those reasons. Populations that are considered vulnerable are the poor, the indigenous populations, and people of color. And so folks who already don't have access to many resources are even more devastated when there's some kind of an extreme weather event, and they lack the resources to recover from them. So they may live in poor areas, like low-lying areas along the coast, often are obviously most affected, and oftentimes that's where poor people live. So that's something that has to be taken into consideration, that so often the people who are, again, who have contributed the least are the most affected by the impacts of climate change and the least able to recover when there has been some kind of a disaster.
You did mention Mozambique. It's something that, had we done the program a month ago, we would not have said Mozambique, we would have had another example. Is there something that you want to mention about how that catastrophe, which some people would just think is well, you know, this is what happens. Got to get used to this now. It's the new normal. Or is there a way you'd like to unpack either that phenomenon in Mozambique or something that has happened locally in the United States, which has many effects that we might not be labeling as it's an effect of what is this climate change?
Oh, yeah.
Is there one you want to unpack a little?
Well, there are lots and lots of examples of that. So take one that is it's international, it's national, it's very, very local, and that's air pollution. So locally, we like to say, oh, the pollution gets blown in from somewhere else, or it comes from mobile sources like trucks coming through our area, and we have no control over that. Well, actually, climate change has an impact on air pollution, and that is that when temperatures go up, when it gets hotter outside and hotter than usual, so do ozone concentrations go up, and ozone is a caustic chemical that burns our lungs. With warmer temperatures, you have a longer growing season. And so plants that produce pollen grow for a longer period of time, produce more pollen. So we have more pollen and allergens in the air. And when it's warmer, it's drier. And when it's drier, there's more dust in the air. So climate change, with its rising temperatures, contributes to air pollution. And that affects all of us, and specifically those of us living in the valley and are most vulnerable. So people who have existing health conditions, specifically respiratory and heart conditions. Young children are particularly impacted by dirty air, and those, of course, children with asthma are at very great risk. So that's a classic example.
And these aren't far away in other
Right
parts
here.
of the world.
It's
We
right here.
have almost gotten too used to what is something that we do blame on the Bay Area, which is such an easy scapegoat because there's a lot of reasons for not liking the Bay Area.
But this is also an opportunity to talk about climate justice. And that's the other piece of the equation. So I've got a list of climate injustices, but I have corresponding justices. And keeping in mind this idea of listening to and partnering with those who are most impacted by the impact of the effects of climate change. So an example of that has to do with air pollution is that there are some people who have come up with this idea for low-cost air monitors that actually measure the particulate matter in the air. And particulate matter refers to the very small particles of pollution in the air that can be created by dust or wildfire smoke or just smoke from burning in your fireplace. That's called particulate matter. And these monitors are called purple air monitors, and that's all one word, purple air. And so there's this whole network of purple air monitors across the country, I think it's international as well, that allows ordinary citizens to keep track of the air and to use that information, that data, that it's, by the way, it's real time. You can just go to a website and see all these little dots that show you where all the monitors are. And it empowers people to then use that information, first of all, to know whether it's safe to go outside or not, and also to point to that data. And when they speak to people in power, to the authorities on these matters, and say, hey, we got a problem here. And so it helps them bolster that argument.
Now, you are representing today, in some way, Citizens Climate Lobby. But could you tell us some of these wonderful local organizations that you and I both know? We're on their committees, we listen to them, we look at their information, we follow them on Twitter. They keep us apprised of what's going on with the air. Tell us about CVAC and some of these other wonderful people.
I would be proud to, because they are our partners for sure. And that's something, another aspect of climate justice, by the way, is the importance of working together and working across the aisle, getting all voices involved in solutions. However, so the local organizations that are really on the forefront when it comes to air pollution include the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition, CVAC. They have been doing tremendous work, particularly around the passage recently of the PM 2.5 plan, which was presented by the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. And that plan addresses the particulate matters in the air that I was talking about that is so damaging to our lungs and bodies. So CVAC has been instrumental in working closely not only with the Valley Air District, which is our air pollution control district, but also with the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. So they've been really advocating for Valley residents in terms of cleaning up our air. Another organization is the Central California Asthma Collaborative, and they too have been instrumental in working with the Air District and promoting or advocating for clean air. And a third organization is the Central California Environmental Justice Network. And something that they do is they maintain a monitoring system for illegal pesticide spraying. And once again, they advocate for people and partner with people on the front lines, those people who are actually being illegally sprayed and impacted, put at risk by illegal spraying of pesticides. So the Central California Environmental Justice Network maintains this monitoring system where ordinary citizens can report whenever they see some illegal spraying going on. And so they keep track of this. And again, they can use that information when they are advocating for better regulations.
And what about the Council on Justice and
Leadership Council on Justice and Accountability, yes.
They are the lawyers in this and doing phenomenal work. It seems like there is a really grassroots, but also a organizational system in place with tremendous people whom we could mention by name, because they are not only working independently, each one of those organizations, but when the energy of those groups becomes a system, we are being protected, we're being advocated for, and we're getting results.
Yes.
So where would it be that you might want to say Citizens Climate Lobby is also finally you a chance to say something about your own commitment for 10 years now with CCL. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, thank you for this opportunity to talk about Citizens Climate Lobby. Our mission is to create the political will for bipartisan climate solutions by enabling ordinary citizens to exercise their personal and political power. So when I first joined the organization, I was most focused on that first piece. Yeah, I want to get involved in the solution to climate change. But I really come to appreciate the power of the second part of our mission statement, which is enabling ordinary citizens to exercise their personal and political power. We are encouraged and then trained and then supported to speak up when we see something that we don't think is right. And we think climate change is not right, and we want our politicians to do something about it. I like to say that politicians don't create political will, they respond to it.
Oh, yeah.
And so it is up to us to tell them, we don't like what's happening. We don't like seeing images of people drowning and losing everything in Mozambique or in Nebraska. That's not acceptable. That's not the way we want to care for our creation, for God's creation, if you will. So we want something done about it. Now, our organization, Citizens Climate Lobby, actually has already a plan for that. It's bipartisan legislation that's already been introduced in the House of Representatives. It was introduced last year, both in the House and Senate, and it was reintroduced already in this session of Congress in the House. It's called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, EICDA, Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And we're really excited about it because it's going to be effective in reducing carbon emissions by 40% in 12 years. It's going to be good for people because it's going to save lives, basically, clean up the air. It's going to help with that. It's bipartisan. And in this time of so much gridlock and vitriol in Washington, we're there saying, no, let's work together. This is a huge problem. It takes all of us on board to solve this problem.
This idea of bipartisan is the most important word I think we've used all in the 20 minutes of the program so far. It doesn't seem that anything else much does get done bipartisan. There seems to be that there are people either, as they say, from the left or from the right, that are very protective of interests, very, very defensive and territorial, but also doing what they would say is the right thing, defending. Now, how is it that CCL is able to even say that they do bipartisan legislation? How do you accomplish that in the atmosphere we're living in?
That is a key element of our organization. Our approach is always respectful and even appreciative. So we are welcome in the offices of our members of Congress. CCL emphasizes that when we are communicating with congressional staff and members of Congress themselves, we are always to be respectful. And so, in fact, the founder of our organization is named Marshall Saunders. He's a very kind, gentle man, and I went up to him one time at the first national conference I went to in Washington, D.C. He's just sitting out in the lobby having coffee and chatting to people who come up to him. He's that accessible. And I walked up to him and I said, Marshall, how do we get these climate deniers to come on board with us? And he said, just love them and bring them along. And that really epitomizes the philosophy of this organization. We are not about shaming and blaming. We are about accepting people where they are on the journey and having a conversation. We have a lot of conversations. We don't walk into the office of a member of Congress and pound on the desk and say, this is what we demand, and walk out and never contact them again. We go in and say, let's have a conversation about this. Where can we find common ground, and how can we expand that common ground? That personally works really well with me and my philosophy about how to get along with other people. And it seems to work well because they respond to it. And we locally are on a first name basis with staff in all of the offices of our local members of Congress, all three of them. Well, one of them, we're still getting to know TJ Cox. But
I was going to actually throw in that question about how it is. There was a major article in the Bee the other day about our three legislators, where they are not exactly, obviously they are not. They are three distinct politicians. How is it though with the two that you've been able to, with Costa and Devin Nunes, you've been somehow able to get to what point? At what point of conversation and respect, and what has it accomplished, let's say? Like, what's been the takeaway?
Yeah. So one reason that we are able to build relationships with our members of Congress is that we respect confidentiality. So I can't share any specifics, but what I can say is that in both cases of Representative Costa and Representative Nunes, we have met with their staff in district. We have met in person with Representative Costa several times. But we have had respectful, positive conversations with the staff of both of these members of Congress. And the important thing, I think, is that the door is open. The conversation continues. We don't see eye to eye on things. But now that there's a bill in Congress, that changes things. We have something very specific. Up until now, up until the end of last year, we've had this idea. We've had this proposal for a solution. Now we actually have bipartisan legislation that we can talk to. And congressional staff is much more willing to talk about something that is concrete, that exists, as opposed to an idea. Because we all know that ideas change over time and disappear sometimes. So this is concrete, this is the real deal, and so our members of Congress can look at it and say, well, I like that, I don't like that, and that provides a lot of information for us.
You know, I'm so glad that you are giving us details up to the point that you can, that when there is legislation, when there is something to really advocate for, it's way better than just having a meet and greet over, theoretically, so where are you on climate control? Where are you going to help us get better air? What are you going to do with the water situation? It's like, let's talk about a bill. So the same thing is going on, believe it or not, with legislation that I'd be involved with in advocacy over Catholic Relief Service, which is the same type of a group that needs to get responses from Republicans and Democrats over foreign aid and over taking care of our poor right here in this country. So it's great to see that CCL is committed to the long conversation.
Absolutely.
Rather than the quick fight.
That's
And just leave blood on the desk and,
Right.
oh, we don't like, he's useless, or she's not going to ever change.
It's about relationships.
It's got to be.
It's about honoring the human dignity of every person. It's about creating working relationships with people.
So we've got about 3.5 minutes. We've been able to do, I think, a nice sharing on CCL. We left that little conversation about climate justice and justice. Did we want to revisit another example of where you'd concretely see justice and climate injustice, or more about how people could get connected with Citizens Climate Lobby? If what you've said interests any of our viewers and our listeners, how could they get on board? How could they join this bipartisan conversation?
Sure. Oh, I'd be happy to talk about that. So it is
We can post that, and we
Yeah.
can, the main thing is, walk us through what would be the ways that people could start connecting with Citizens Climate Lobby.
Okay, so I hope on the screen you're seeing a list of ways to contact us. So we are local. We have monthly meetings, and they are posted on our Facebook page, which should be showing on your screen. And also, if you would like to be on our email list, that email address is there too. You can contact me, or there's a way that you can sign up for it. One simple way that you can help us is just to become a supporter of Citizens Climate Lobby. On that screen, you'll see a text to join phone number, which you can just dial up if you want to, or you can go to the website, which is citizensclimatelobby.org, and there's a way to join there. It doesn't cost anything, it's free, and if you decide after time that you're not interested, you can unsubscribe. But the more supporters that we have, the more influence we will wield when we are in Congress, when we're talking to members of Congress, and we can say, like right now, we can say we have 100,000 supporters, which we do, not locally, but nationally, 100,000 people who are passionate about climate change and want us to do something about it. But the more we have, the better. So join up.
Now, earlier I did ask, so a lot of groups by attrition sort of shrink with time, but you were letting me know there is a growth in the local Citizens Climate Lobby.
Yes.
Tell us about the energy you're getting even after 10 years now of working. Why does it work so well here in Fresno?
Well, I think it's working well internationally. I mean, CCL actually is an international organization, but it's working because sadly there are an increasing number of examples of what's happening with climate change, and more people are acknowledging their anxiety and their concern about this and wanting to be part of the solution. And we hear that. In fact, when we are out in the community with our informational booth, we have a little survey, just an informal, and it's a way to start a conversation with the people who come to our table. And we ask them, what's your level of concern about climate change? Alarmed, concerned, disengaged, apathetic. More and more people are leaning towards the concerned and alarmed side of things, and that's what national polls are showing as well. There's an increasing awareness of climate change and an increasing desire to do something about it.
Well, I want to thank Connie Young for finally hosting her on a program talking about something she passionately is committed to. I'm hoping some of you caught that fever and are going to be in touch with her and with Citizens Climate Lobby. Till next time, this is Jim Grant looking at social justice.